Hello friends, my name is Ihor Havryshchak. This is traditionally the YouTube platform of Channel 24. We are live, so be active, subscribe, comment, like. We will ask questions on the air, if they are constructive. Today's guest is Russian opposition journalist and founder of the movement, Russia Behind Bars, Olga Romanova. Olga, hello.
Good afternoon.
Olga, I would probably like to start a conversation with you about the fact that there is an appeal from the Chechen Ombudsman, no matter how it sounds, it is, and he says, well, he has recorded a lot of videos, claims that nationalists in Russia have become more active and are beginning to put pressure on the Chechens. Well, here I would also like to recall the story of Wildberries, when Chechens shot in an office in the center of Moscow. They say that a lot of interesting people were involved in it. There are Suleiman Kerimov and Shakro Molodoi, who, as you know, is now #1, as I understand it, in the criminal world not only of the Russian Federation. Is it realistic that the Kadyrovites already feel completely free and do what they want? Because here we can add Putin's visit, where he was photographed, well, almost with the entire Kadyrov family.
Indeed, both the Chechens and Chechnya have long been in a special position with Putin. And it should be noted that there is a historical connection and even a slightly anecdotal situation. When Putin just came to power, he came against the backdrop of Chechen explosions, 2 Chechen wars, and his friend, Ahmed Kadyrov, Ramzan's father, died quite strangely. Surprisingly, no one has ever looked for the killers of Ahmed Kadyrov, and the only person who benefited from this death was, in fact, Ramzan, the head of his guard.
Отец Рамзана, и довольно странно, что никто не искал никогда убийц Ахмада Кадырова, а единственный человек, которому это убийство было на руку, это, собственно, Рамзан, начальник его охраны.
Just like now, Adam Kadyrov, the head of security at Dad's. But this is not so important. The Chechens have always been Putin's wild division or Putin's oprichniks. That's right. And when, as we know, Medvedev came to power temporarily, he wanted his own wild division and his own oprichnina. And for this, in fact, he had Dagestanis. He began to invest in Dagestan. Suleiman Kerimov appeared, by the way, just then. Then the NG football club suddenly burst into the Russian Football Premier League. It was also Suleiman Kerimov, it was Medvedev, it was Dagestan. The most important of Medvedev's henchmen were, in fact, the Magomedov brothers, businessmen. And Zumrud greatly contributed to all this. Zumrud, then the wife of Medvedev's assistant Arkady Dvorkovich, who, so to speak, very dashingly, jumped out of the war and now heads the chess federation. A lot of things were happening around him. They celebrated either the 3,000 or 5,000 years at Derbent, where they found an Orthodox cistern, which, in fact, is considered to be some kind of important object, and they said that it was from here that Christianity originated, in general, everywhere and everywhere, nowhere else. In general, some colossal money was invested in this. But when Medvedev ended, it ended sadly. They quickly explained to everyone the Dagestanis that no, the Tsar has one regiment, one wild division, these are the Chechens, and you are here, and the Yushi, and the Kabardino-Balkars, stand aside. And, of course, from that moment, I would say, the internal Caucasian rejection and slight but obvious tension and confrontation with Chechnya continued. Let me remind you, for example, that in Ingushetia a few years ago, even before the war, there were mass arrests of both women and elders, because the Ingush demanded respect for the administrative border with Chechnya. And those who demanded that the borders be respected, and Chechnya simply pushed back the post, those, in fact, received huge sentences. There are 16 years old, and 17 years old, and 18 years old. And you just remembered the shootout at Wildberries. The dead are Ingush. The guards were Ingush. And now we see who in Wildberries again? Ramzan Kadyrov is here, Suleiman Kerimov is here. Here again all this is returning to the good old days. And, of course, the cherry on the cake are Mirzayan's brothers, they are Izids. They are Izids from Tbilisi, exactly from the same clan where Zakir Kalash and the late grandfather Karsan, aka Usayan, come from. In general, this is not just a Russian thief-in-law, grandfather Karsan, as well as the heir of Shakro Molodoy, he is, one might say, a thief-in-law on the scale of the CIS. No matter how much I talk with Ukrainian prisoners, the criminal world of Ukraine, for example, is well aware of who Shakro Molodoy is, and understands it very well.
Olga, tell me, please, this Shakro Molodoy, if I am not mistaken, was released in March, and he still retains a phenomenal influence on the criminal world of the entire CIS.
Yes, indeed, he has influence. Despite the fact that he actually supported the war and was released by a court decision in Ust-Labinsk, it is worth noting that Ust-Labinsk is a place that is completely controlled by the Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, and the Ust-Labinsk court, in fact, released him in a closed session. And this was preceded by a big behind-the-scenes battle, a criminal struggle, which was associated with the fact that Muslim thieves-in-law began to gain the upper hand in the Russian criminal world, and the Yazidis, although not Orthodox, are also not Muslims. This was preceded by the news that the allegedly named son or heir of Shakro the Young was somehow very upset by these same Muslim thieves-in-law, and he was almost beaten.
Предшествовало тому известие, что якобы названного сына или названного наследника Шакро Молодого как-то очень огорчили эти самые мусульманские воры в законе, как-то его чуть ли не побили.
And several such thieves, serious ones, moved from Uzbekistan to Moscow, to Russia. And this move was associated with the interests of another Putin oligarch, Medvedev's oligarch Alisher Usmanov. And allegedly it was decided to urgently release Shakro Molodoy. Yes, now the Kraken has been released in order to stop the Islamization of the Russian underworld. He left the Islamization of the Russian underworld, yes, but then Ramzan Kadyrov appeared and said, wait a minute.
Olga, you remembered and outlined the criminal world very well with the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. To what extent has the criminal world in Russia lost influence, or has it become even stronger?
No, the Russian criminal world, firstly, accepted the war, which was actually very unexpected. It should be noted that the Russian criminal world took a break until about the fall of 2022, and in October 2022 it was already accepted, and, in fact, it was accepted by Zakir Kalashov, with whom negotiations were clearly held. We know today about the death of 12 crown thieves-in-law in the war against Ukraine from the Russian side. These are people who were released from prison, and we know about their deaths in notarial cases, in inheritance cases. That is, most likely, there are more of them died and more are fighting. This is only what we know for sure. This is being done by the BBC together with the Media Zone. They identify the dead in open material cases. 12 thieves-in-law. Yes, the Russian criminal world has accepted this. I must say that unlike the Ukrainian one, we are constantly engaged in the export of Ukrainian prisoners who were abducted by Russia in November 2022 for a completely unknown purpose, and among them there are Ukrainian thieves-in-law, various authorities, and just all you need to do is return them to their place of residence and citizenship. Actually, first of all, very few of them accept Russian citizenship. Very few people adopt, but few. Secondly, in Surovikino, where there was a recent mutiny and hostage-taking, allegedly associated with ISIS, there are a lot of Ukrainians there, and I know that people, Ukrainians, get additional sentences for refusing to get tattoos. And to remove tattoos means to get them in prison. You can't just go to a cosmetologist and remove them. No, it's hammering with another tattoo on top. But there are not only stars to score, but also tridents. And a lot of people have tridents. People refuse, get additional sentences, up to that.
Olga, I would also like to ask you about such an interesting person. Here is Putin's niece Anna Sivileva. She is growing very quickly in rank. So she became the deputy of the new, as I understand it, head of the Ministry of Defense Belousov. Now Putin has handed her a major general. How can this be regarded? Is Putin looking for someone who will come to his throne after him? Or does he no longer trust anyone and some relatives surround him? Why this person and why is he growing so fast?
Well, yes, the niece is her own blood after all. Secondly, quite recently, this week, Dmitry Peskov dropped a very strange phrase, the meaning of which was that allegedly Putin, in principle, could be replaced by a military man. This is the same Anna Sivileva, she is a military man. Now her rank corresponds to the rank of Major General. It is completely clear that she is still a military man. Yes, she is a military man, like a bullet from shit, sorry. But, nevertheless, it is a native bloodline. And Svarov's husband, a former governor, is now in the Ministry of Energy. Well, why not? After all, it's no worse than Gard Nyaman, no worse. Just even, let's say, better, quite a pretty, young woman. Apparently, she is not completely stupid, although Putin is misogynist, so it is difficult to say here. I think that, of course, some casting is going on, there is casting. And in this casting, I think, Putin's daughters, including the sons of his closest associates, are also involved. For example, Dmitry Patrushev, the son of Nikolai Patrushev. Casting is underway. He goes, you know, as if under the stick. That is, Putin, in principle, knows that he is not immortal, but this is not certain.
By the way, do you think, Olga, maybe you know how the top and Putin himself feel about the fact that some investigations regularly appear, and the last thing is that his children are secretly studying somewhere there, he constantly hides them. Why hide it if you regularly go out for orthodox values, for your family, for this, for that? He hides everyone.
You know, this week there was another funny case when a quite loyal journalist asked Ekaterina Mazulina Jr. why she, speaking out against child-free, was childless herself. And they came to this journalist to explain to her in a popular way that this is not possible with Ekaterina Mazulina. What is it like this petty on Arcania, how this petty thing could suddenly become instantly so influential that it even comes to loyal journalists who ask the wrong questions, and even more so about this.
Стать мгновенно настолько влиятельной, что даже приходит к лояльным журналистам, которые задали не те вопросы, да и тем более про это.
They say because she replaced Helena Kabeva in this place. Therefore, it is natural that when a person, if this is so, and I think that if this is not so, then something similar. So, Putin somehow still reacts very vividly to girls. It seems to me that the answer to this question lies in the fact that he cannot decide in any way about the family, within the framework of permissiveness and within the framework of the absence of public censure. Of course, he can do whatever he wants, and he does.
Olga, the latest signed decrees to Putin obviously indicate that he does not have enough people to fight in Ukraine. This decree that before, only if you were under investigation and if you were already behind bars, you could sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense. Now, as I understand it, everyone who even has hints about the investigation can quickly sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense and go to war. An important story is also that they conducted an investigation, or just dug in, and found out that over the next 2 years, Putin wants to take on a contract from 2025 to 2027 to 5,000 people. Allegedly this money is included in the budget. I'm wondering, he keeps trying to somehow convicts, yes, a contract. Is he really afraid to announce some kind of partial mobilization again?
And why, when he can still get by with these convicts and the forces of those who can be bought, while such a pretty, sweet woman works for him? How many sweet, pretty women he has, it's scary to think. Elvira Sakim's Edoana Byalna, as long as she provides Putin with money and his economy with stabilization, the war, in fact, can simply be bought. Putin buys. Putin recruits 30,000 people a month and sends them to war now. Therefore, 225,000 in 3 years, but this is actually 6 months, he will highlight this plan. Therefore, this is not so much of what is written in the budget. Another thing is that if you deal with prisoners, then you don't have to pay them, because prisoners are not included in the category of either contract soldiers, or mobilized, or conscripts, or even volunteers. They just sign a consent and do not need to spend money on them. These new laws, signed, in fact, simply bring the legislative framework to what has already existed for quite a long time. Even when Ilya Yashin, a Russian opposition leader, was in Moscow, in the Medved pre-trial detention center, it was in the summer of 2022, he testified that the defendants were also being taken from the pre-trial detention center. We all see the participants in a large torture case in Irkutsk. It has been going on for 4 years, when hundreds of prisoners were tortured and raped. And this case, in fact, is very, very difficult. But when employees of the Federal Penitentiary Service, who were eventually brought to this dock with great difficulty, suddenly disappear from the dock because they went to the front. This happened long before all these laws appeared. So all this just legitimizes what really happened. Everything is legitimizing now little by little, except for one thing. No one has ever thought or legitimized the late Yevgeny Prigozhin. That is, all these 50,000 people whom he took from the colonies in the summer and autumn of 2022. It was illegal, and it remained.
By the way, Olga, you remembered that in Sinovitz, even if they do not end up in the dock, they easily went to the front even before these laws. But now, do you think it can be such a global large-scale loophole? Because if you have connections, you probably have them at the front or somehow find them. That's exactly what you want. You kill whoever you want, rape whoever you want, and if you are taken, you say, I'm going to the front, and again you are free.
You know, this week there was probably the most egregious case, when a person in St. Petersburg, I think his name is Klaus Romy, something like that, was detained for sexual acts, lewd acts and rape of a 10-year-old girl. The court did not even arrest him. He was simply released. He was simply released to a military unit. The fact is that in fact, now people are being tried and people are being seized much more than in peacetime, because it is easier to send them to war this way. But if a person is already a military man, they don't touch him at all. If that very criminal, this pedophile, had not been a military man, he would have been arrested, brought to a pre-trial detention center, and he would have been recruited in a pre-trial detention center, and then he would have been released. Just an unnecessary iteration. In principle, people are being sent. This week the detainees were sent without even bringing people to the pre-trial detention center. One for stealing 2 cans of stew in a store, one for stealing a bottle of vodka in a store, and a woman who is 50 years old and who is in Nizhny Novgorod, for stealing, I don't know what, food worth 3,000 rubles in Selmag. That is, imagine, first of all, this class is quite marginal. And secondly, a 50-year-old woman agreed to go to war for 3,000 rubles and went.
Olga, don't you think that this is mobilization, only in Putin's way? Because what he said at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, to defend the fatherland, now the rhetoric has changed a little. Because they are already calling a war, they are already attacking, they are already moving forward, and no one is eager to defend if they do not give money, something incomprehensible there. Demobilization has already disappeared, yes, from the rhetoric, and if you don't stifle mobilization, you just give a term. If you don't want a term, that's how you say, 3,000 rubles, and go to the front.
Well, here I think that military historians and specialists will still define Putin's current army, which, of course, is unlike anything that we have seen so far in the history of mankind. On the one hand, is it a mercenary army? Of course, mercenary, of course. Because these contracts, 400,000 only when signing the contract, this is, of course, a purchase, of course, this is a purchase. Plus legionnaires and plus convicts, who have their own motivation. And this motivation in any case, anything but prison. Because after all, even in Putin's war, a person is more subjective than in a Russian prison, and this was also arranged by Putin.
If we talk about the Ministry of Defense, Olga, here is the replacement of Belousov, and when Shoigu was removed, can we now draw any conclusions? Why did this happen? Some say because Belousov was supposed to direct the entire economy to the military-industrial complex. Others say he went there to root out corruption. And it was after Belousov became the head of the Ministry of Defense that a lot of detentions of all sorts of generals, majors and others began. That's why Belousov came. And how much does Shoigu influence the situation in Russia now?
Shoigu has no influence on the situation in Russia, since Belousov came for both. Why did Belousov come? You can put any theory in general, and it will be, in general, partially true. But why Shoigu left is, of course, much more interesting. Although this refers to the past, but, you know, this past always comes unexpectedly. Because he has lost Putin's trust. He lost Putin's trust because he did not take Kyiv in 3 days and generally promised a lot of things and did not do. But the fact that he steals always suits Putin. Putin is always satisfied with people who steal, because they are clear to him. Understandable, predictable, he understands what it is, and does not believe in the existence of people who do not steal. But he lost trust. And that's it. Now, of course, he does not influence Putin, he cannot meet with him. He, of course, remained in some position, but soon he will leave it, if he remains alive at all. And I personally have very strong doubts. Putin is offended by him.
I read an article written by a woman, an American history who has been dealing with the issue of Russia for many years. Her name is Amy Knight. And so she says that, firstly, Putin's entourage, we will not call them the elite, it seems to me that this is somehow wrong, they are tired of the war. In what sense? That there is money, there is influence, but it cannot actually be used anywhere, except for Russia. Well, we are well aware that we want to ride somewhere on a yacht, and show everyone that I can wear some branded expensive clothes there. What am I leading to? Tired. They say that Putin's entourage is tired of the war.
Partly so, because yes, not everyone is really able to live in these conditions. The main thing is that it is clear that what follows is also a war, still a war in which there is no end in sight. On the other hand, all this elite has been rebuilt perfectly. It seems to me that we are losing contact, all this elite has rebuilt, and it is already receiving income from the war. Almost everything.
Вся эта элита перестроилась, и она уже получает доход от войны, практически вся.
Got it. You mentioned Deripaska today. He said and mentioned several times that war is very bad for Russia. And it seemed to me some kind of savagery, because a person who is directly dependent on the Kremlin, who is close to him, he says that there is no war. Why did this happen, and is Deripaska really not afraid to speak out like that?
Deripaska also has the same situation. On the one hand, he is very close to the family of Boris Yeltsin. He is still the former son-in-law of Yumashev, the husband of Tatiana Dichenko. That is, he is part of this family circle, which includes, for example, Roman Abramovich, who is still considered a person. I think that he himself dissolves these cases, who participates in the negotiations. In difficult negotiations, he is allegedly engaged in both the exchange and the search for Ukrainian children, and somehow softens Putin. Deripaska is from this clan. Of course, he really wants to. He is still a young man. He is 57 to 58 years old, Deripaska. And, of course, he would probably like to live on. He has been under US sanctions for a long time. But I believe that he would very much like to join the Abramovich clan, to be known as such a man of peace, so that after the war people would be surprised by his exploits, and he could continue his business, and life, and so on. Never believe him.
Olga, I remember this story when the wives of the mobilized went out to protest at the Ministry of Defense in Moscow. And it's not that law enforcement agencies came and banned there. They put them in a paddy wagon. How much can this affect the processes in Russia? Because Putin says one thing from the screen, he says that it is necessary to replace people who are involved in the so-called special military operation. They must go to power, and on the other hand, they shut the mouths of those who were generally untouchable.
And the Russians do not see this. Russians see TVs, they see the Vremya program, they see Katya Andreeva, they don't see it. This, you and I see, we are people who are simply used to receiving information from normal sources. Few people get this on the information table for Russians. Naturally, this is the first thing. And secondly, listen, wives are not seen by their husbands. Otherwise, as far as we already know, there has been a movement of mobilized wives for a year now. We hear wives from time to time. Excuse me, but what do husbands do at this time? Can I find out?
Olga, you say what you say on TV, you listen to. We understand perfectly well that after the Kursk operation began, it was on August 6th, not very much is being said. The main thing is Donbass, the offensive, the demilitarization of Ukraine. And how do Russians themselves perceive Kursk? From what I see, in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, in other regions, yes, Kursk is far away, yes, I don't care what happens there. Therefore, I believe that if an operation theoretically begins in the Bryansk region or in the Belgorod region, it will not be the same as with Kursk.
It doesn't matter at all, even with a neighbor. When something happens, it doesn't matter at all. Kursk is far away. I don't know what happened there. It's some kind of border area and some kind of province in general, but the most important thing is the attitude towards refugees from the Kursk region. The attitude is such that you came to live on our territory, eat our bread, and no. I even saw some kind of press release in the SIN. It was already in September. As the employees of the penitentiary department reported, they came to the refugees from the Kursk region. Why was it not said what the refugees were doing in the Ivanovo region? And the employees of the penitentiary system showed the children tricks. They showed tricks and left. I looked at it like this. In general, children need to learn what tricks. They showed tricks and left. This is the maximum that can be done for a ceremonial press release. Sending children to school, bringing teachers, bringing textbooks, no.
By the way, you mentioned Arsenov for X5, and I also remember the statement of Kolokoltsev, the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia, that he does not have enough money, that he is not given enough money, that it is impossible to improve the way of life. And what I am getting at, it is clear that the entire vertical of power and the entire management of Putin's dictatorship rests on the security forces. There are a lot of them, and a lot of money is needed. But as I understand it, everything goes to war, and those structures that are supposed to maintain control inside Russia are beginning to be dissatisfied. How much dissatisfaction can this really be if Kolokholtsev officially says that he does not have enough money?
Well, there is no such thing as too much money, especially for the security forces. And they will definitely show all their usefulness for Putin, just to get more money, because the FSB always has more money. The confrontation between the FSB, the army and the police, it is always clear and obvious. Now it seems that money is going to the military, because of the war. The FSB, because the FSB always gets money. Again, the police are junior. At the same time, the police, what is they doing? It catches criminals, that is, supplies the army with manpower, sends them to prison. And you still have to pay for it, too. It costs money.
Olga, thank you very much for this conversation, for taking the time to talk about important processes, and I want our viewers to be more active, put likes. Thank you.
Thank you. Olga Romanova, an opposition journalist, was with us. Share our conversation. My name is Ihor Havryshchak.